causing trouble. All right, this is an awesome crowd. Thank you for coming out in the heat. This is the hottest day, I think, since I've moved here. Welcome to this year's Tabula Poetica reading series. If I counted correctly, I think we've been doing this for 7 years, and I cannot believe that it's been 7 years. This project brings poets to Chapman University to read from their own work and also to talk about poetry. We have 4 visiting poets this fall, including this evening's, and then the series concludes, as it always does, with the MFA poetry reading so that we can celebrate the work of our own graduate students. Pull out your cell phone now, and if you would like to tweet that you are here or post it on Facebook, I encourage you to do that, but then silence your phone. While you're doing that, I'm going to thank some of the people and organizations that make Tabula Poetica possible. Most of the support for this project comes from the English department, and that's been true from the get-go. Tonight, I also want to thank especially the department chair, Joanna Levin, our administrative assistants, Debbie Thacker and Kristen Laxo, and my graduate assistant for Tabula Poetica, David Krausman. And Joanna Levin and David are here, so let's give them a round of applause. This year, we also have support from the Dean of Students Office, the Department of History, and the Rogers Center for Holocaust Education, which has an event at 7 p.m. if you're interested in more cultural activity today. Without these co-sponsors, and also a tremendous gift from the Chancellor's office, and the Chancellor is here, he'll be introducing the poet. Without all these supporters, Carolyn Forché wouldn't be here today. Leatherby Libraries, where we are now, and Fish Interfaith Center, where we were this afternoon for the poetry talk, continue to be great hosts for our events. The amazing snacks for today's reading, including wine, which I wasn't expecting, were provided by the library. They always do a great job throwing a party. And Dean Charlene Baldwin, who couldn't be here this evening, has been a champion of Tabula Poetica from its inception. So my job was basically to tell you to turn off your cell phone and give you time to do that. And I'm reminded that a few weeks ago on Facebook, somebody, a Facebook friend I've actually never met in person, but a fellow writer, said that they were looking for Carolyn Forché videos online. They found the AWP reading from this past spring, and they started playing it, and there was my voice, and they complimented me on asking everyone to turn off their cell phones. So I'm getting really good at this part. And I'm going to turn it over now to Daniele Strupa, who has been an amazing champion of poetry since I've been here, and he knows Carolyn from earlier days, so he's going to introduce the poet.
Welcome and good evening, everyone. So Anna is always very kind, and she thanks all the people who made this evening possible, but the most important person we need to thank really is Anna. I'd like to give her a round of applause. I remember when we hired Anna, and she really brought a really new perspective to our program, and her passion and her love for poetry is just infectious. And I see how this has affected our students and our colleagues, and so I'm really grateful to you about this. As my friends know, I really don't like, generally speaking, introducing speakers. I don't like it because I guess the American academia setup is a little too formal. You have this long list of achievements. Yeah, and they kind of remind me of another American custom that I don't think I'll ever get used to, which is the celebration of life that people have when somebody dies. And you know, I'm Italian, we don't do that. You go to a funeral, then everybody goes home, and that's the end of the story. So with this long list of accomplishments always makes me feel a little odd. And then I think I shared on this stage a year or so ago, I had the misfortune, in a sense, of watching an incredible piece of performance art a few years ago. The title was Official Welcome by Andrea Fraser. Now, Andrea Fraser is a professor of performance art at UCLA, and the piece that she does, which is actually, you can see it at the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco. It's called Official Welcome, and it's a mimic of all the ways through which we welcome speakers at a conference. It goes from the pompous, so the speech is really all about yourself, all about the introducer, and very little about the person who gets introduced, and I'm going to do some of that. And the embarrassed, which is typical of mathematicians. You should see when mathematicians introduce speakers, they don't know what to do, and they usually look down at their feet. So there is a little bit of that in me too. To the falsely personal, and it's really an incredible tour de force. So whenever you have a moment, go on the web and look up Official Welcome by Andrea Fraser, and you're never going to be able to introduce anybody for the rest of your life. What makes my night tonight a little different is really that the person I'm going to introduce you, and yeah, I'll give you also the long list of accomplishment, but it's somebody who played a very important role in my career. We met in an interesting moment of my life, and I was almost crying when I saw her today walking, walking up from the elevator. We met about 20 years ago, and I was young at the time, a young Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at George Mason University. And I realized it was going to be a difficult job because we had a very intelligent president and a very intelligent provost, but they lacked in the imagination department. And so they couldn't imagine what would you do with the liberal arts. So they were very happy about our business school and about the engineering school and school of public policy. But I always had the impression that for them, the liberal arts were almost like a quaint antique shop where you go and you find some nice little objects that you go home and you put there in display, but you never really use. And so as a young dean, I was struggling to find something that I could show them that was worthwhile. And so I found help with my economics department. We had a Nobel Prize at the time, and not Vernon Smith. Vernon came later. His Nobel Prize at the time was Jim Buchanan, the inventor of the theory of public choice. And though he was obviously a huge name, he was also kind of not really a conversationalist. So you couldn't really bring him around to parties and inflame the audience. Yeah, so the next place where I turned to was our creative writing program. At Mason, we really had a fabulous creative writing program. And one of the people there was Richard Bausch, who is now here with us. And so you see the pattern. And we are so happy to have Richard here with us. Great group of people. I really enjoy working with the writers at Mason. I remember they were the first group that really kind of clicked with me, and we started doing stuff together. And so one day, I found out that one of our poets had won a very prestigious award. It was called the Edita and Ira Morris Hiroshima Foundation Award for Peace and Culture. I need to read the reason why this poet was awarded this award was for her work on behalf of human rights and the preservation of memory and culture. That's so important for a place like Chapman, because you know that the preservation of memory is really one of the fundamental values we have. And Anna mentioned the event tonight at the Center for Holocaust Education, who's really devoted to the preservation of memory and the translation of memory in action for all of us. So this poet was Carolyn Forché. So I decided I was going to meet with her so that I could have something I could tell my president and his wife about the value of the liberal arts. And I remember that when I met, I was absolutely struck, and I remain struck now by her intensity, by her passion, by the universal appeal, and the love that transpired for what she was saying and writing. I remember she gave me a book at the time, and the first book I ever read of her was Gathering the Tribes, which then I realized was the first poetry book she ever wrote in 1976, and which was selected for the Yale series of younger poets. I fell in love with her words, and I don't think I knew at the time, though, how powerful those words were. And I found out how powerful they were maybe a year later when I worked together with the mayor of Fairfax, John Mason, and Mr. Church, who was a member of the Board of Trustees, and we created a book festival. It was called Fall for the Book. And it's a festival that's still very active, very successful. And so I asked Carolyn whether she'd be willing to do a reading at that festival. And because this was the first time we had the festival, I went virtually to every single event. There were like 72 hours of madness, going from reading to reading, poetry slam. And I remember how, for the first time in my life, because I'd never been to a poetry reading before, how I realized how reading can really transform completely what you have in front of you. And so for those of you who have never heard Carolyn read, I think tonight you're in for an amazing, amazing experience. It's really captured me to what words cannot describe. We remain good friends and colleagues for many years, and I still remember with sadness when she decided to leave us and go to Skidmore. I thought it was a great choice for her. It was a place where obviously she could do things that she couldn't do at Mason. But I remember being truly dismayed, not just for the university, because of course I care for our institution, but personally because I was losing a friend that was now going to move far away. I mentioned Carolyn's first collection, and then a year later, in 1977, she received a Guggenheim Fellowship. She used that fellowship to travel to El Salvador, where she works as a human rights advocate. And that experience, you know, she actually left El Salvador just a week before the assassination of Bishop Romero. That experience is reflected in the second book, The Country Between Us, that she wrote in 1981. And since then, it's been just one success after another. This is the part in which I make the list of the great successes, or at least some of them. She received awards from the Poetry Society of America, from the Academy of American Poets. She wrote an anthology, she collected an anthology, Against Forgetting, 20th Century Poetry of Witness, published in 1993. And rather than telling you about that anthology, I'd like to say what Nelson Mandela wrote about it. He said, Carolyn Forché, Against Forgetting, is itself a blow against tyranny, against prejudice, against injustice. It bears witness to the evil we would prefer to forget, but never can and never should. Her third book of poetry, The Angel of History, in 1994, was chosen for the Los Angeles Times Book Award. She received the Lannan Foundation Literary Fellowship, the Robert Creeley Award. She held 3 fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship, received the Academy of American Poets Fellowship, and just last year, she was a finalist for the prestigious International Neustadt Literary Prize. Her more recent work include a new anthology, The Poetry of Witness, and a memoir, In Another Country, Another Time, on which I believe she's currently working, but maybe she'll tell us some more about that. And so now on this point, I'd like to ask you to please join me in welcoming our poet and friend, Carolyn Forché.
He was the best dean ever. I'm so happy to be here at Chapman and to see him again and see Richard Bausch again and all of us to be together. Thank you for coming this afternoon. I'm going to read primarily from my new book of poems, and it's called In the Lateness of the World. I'm almost finished with the memoir, which is about those years in El Salvador and in the time after, and it's called now What You Have Heard Is True. And more about that later, but it's almost done. So the new poems. It begins with a poem about lighthouses. I don't think you have a lighthouse here in Orange County. I hope not. You might someday. But this one is about the history of lighthouses, but it's also something else. It has to do with something else. I like to go to lighthouses, and people who love them love to go when they can be alone with their lighthouse. Only there are other people who love the lighthouses. So there are always people walking around at your lighthouse. And so you look at each other like, please go away. Are you finished now? Are you going? So it's bad. It's bad. The Light Keeper. A night without ships. Foghorns calling into walled cloud. And you still alive. Drawn to the light, as if it were a fire kept by monks. Darkness once crusted with stars, but now death dark as you sail inward. Through wild gorse and sea wrack, through heather and torn wool you ran, pulling me by the hand so I could see this for once in my life. The spin and spin of light. The whirring of it, light in search of the lost. There since the era of fire, era of candles and hollow wick lamps, whale oil and solid wick, colza and lard, kerosene and carbide, the signal fires lighted in this perilous coast in the Tower of Hook. You say to me, stay awake. Be like the lens maker who died with his lungs full of glass. Be the yew in blossom when bees swarm. Be their amber cathedral. And even the ghosts of Cistercians will be kind to you. In a certain light as after rain, in pearled clouds or the water beyond, seen or sensed water, sea or lake, you would stop still and gaze out for a long time. Also when fireflies opened and closed in the pines, and a star appeared, our only heaven. You taught me to live like this, that after death it would be as it was before we were born. Nothing to be afraid, nothing but happiness, as unbearable as the dread from which it comes. Go toward the light always. Be without ships. So this is really a poem about worrying about death. And now I have an early one, a one about early life. I'm from Detroit. French Canadians had a fancier name for the city when I was young, so I give you the fancier name. But this is about my childhood. I don't write much from the early life in my work, so this was unusual, but I let it happen. Early life. In le Détroit du Lac-Érié, 5 years after the end of the war, I was born. My father's naval uniform hung among our coats, and his white cap, flung into the sea at war's end, still then floated on the waves there. My father built a house for us, working in the dark after his factory shift. One night, a long-buried woman appeared, all fog and bones, passing through a wall he'd yet to finish. Later we hung a mirror there, and from time to time, the fog woman stood behind the mirror looking out. Beneath a nearby house, there was a cellar where escaping slaves once were hidden. An underground railroad carried them through a tunnel beneath the fields. In the mornings, the fields hum their readiness. In the orchard, apples and apricots hid in the trees. In the garden, sudden red cabbage, blue-leaved lilies, endive and wandering mint. Over the field crawled squash vine and blossom until a dark row of berry canes stood in a cloud of bees and lettuces opened in watery light. When Anna was with us, pillows of bread rose in bowls, and soup boiled the windows blind. Anna was from the old country. This was the new one. Many sentences began with "during the war." Be quiet now, they said, in voices like birches in snow. They began their stories when the war ended. Nuns led us to school, walking 2 by 2 in black capes and veils over the ice toward Our Lady of Sorrows. After school, we ironed altar linens. In spring, daffodils called like geese from the ditches. Flocks of laundry pinned to the sky flew forth. Behind us, there was a house made of paper dipped in tar, a hillock of liquor bottles, a smaller house, like a doll's house, for the flies. We are not poor. Our house is of brick. Our mother owns a sewing machine, and we are given oranges at Christmas. I have a friend who was my student for 7 years. He's coming to read for you at Chapman later this fall. His name is Ilya Kaminsky. Now I'm going to ruin everything for Ilya Kaminsky. Ilya Kaminsky showed up in a writing workshop of mine in the summer. He was about 19 years old, very tall, 2 hearing aids and a little box he gave me to hold near my voice so he could hear the vibrations of my voice in his hearing aids. He sat down. We were all around the table. In a summer workshop, everyone introduces themselves. They're all ages. Some of them have just retired from teaching and they want to get back to their poetry. Others are still in school. Many, many different people. They all introduce themselves. Everyone sits and introduces themselves around the table. We came to Ilya last. He stood up. Nobody stands up. And he said, "My name is Ilya Kaminsky. I am from Odessa, former Soviet Union. I write poetry for God." And he sat down. And I've never heard anyone introduce themselves like that before. And I didn't really know what to do. I said, "Okay, well, let's look at our poems." He was amazing and talented and beautiful and a little ethereal, and you'll see, he's coming here. And I took him back to Odessa. He had fled Odessa as a teenager, and so he was a refugee from former Ukraine, now being chopped up a little bit. But I took him back, and this is a little bit from the time when we went back. I wanted him to see it again. I'm not sure it was a great idea. And we also decided to go to St. Petersburg, Russia, which is it's really a city that's a shrine to the silver poets, the great Russian poets of the 20th century. Anna Akhmatova, Marina Tsvetaeva, Osip Mandelstam. We had to go to all of their apartments and things like that. Of course, they were all dead, but he had to go there and pay his respects. There's also a little town. If you ever go to St. Petersburg, you must go to this little town. It's called Tsarskie Selo. It's where the summer palaces of the czars are. And this is where the czars would go, to go shooting and all of that in the summer. And Anna Akhmatova used to spend her girlhood summers there also. And Pushkin, the great poet, writer, Pushkin, went to school there. And now there's a lycée, a school named after him, for Ilya at Tsarskie Selo. We stand at the casement window of Pushkin's lycée. These are the desks where Pushkin wrote, his chalkboards, his astrolabe. Snow falls from here into the past and vanishes on golden minarets. Snow recedes from the birches. A lesson writes itself in winter chalk. On the day Michelangelo died in Rome, Galileo was born in Pisa. Isaac Newton was born the year Galileo died. When they searched for the poet Kabir, they found nothing beneath his shroud but a sprig of jasmine. Man is like the statue, whispering about the marble chiseled from his mouth. You are the guardian of this statue, standing in your silent world. The year Isaac Newton died, there was a barn fire during a puppet show. Kabir says all corpses go to the same place, and the world has fallen in love with a dream. This life is not the same as your other life. We are here now in one of the shrines of the silver poets. You are one of the silver. The snow is a white peacock in a Russian poem. So I also wrote a poem for him called Exile. Shortly after he and his family arrived in the United States to take up their new life, his father died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving the mother with the 2 boys. And so this is a poem a little bit that mentions that, but also a history of Odessa, which is a city that was built all at once on the shores of the Black Sea. It looks like it landed there, because cities that are built all at once all have the same architecture. And because they were built on the Black Sea, they were all built of a stone that's full of fossils. Behind the city is the Russian steppe. just wheat and wheat and wheat. The city of your childhood rises between steppe and sea, wheat and light, white with the dust of cockle shells, stargazers, and bones of pipefish. City of limestone, soft enough to cut with a hatchet, where the sea unfurls and acacias brought by Greeks on their ships turn white in summer. So yes, you remember? This is the city you lost. City of smugglers and violinists, chess players and monkeys, an opera house, a madhouse, a ghost church with wind for its choir, where two things were esteemed, literature and ships, poetry and the sea. If you return now, it will not be as a being visible to others. And when you walk past, it will not be as if a man had passed, but rather as if someone had remembered something long forgotten and wondered why. If you return, your father will be alive to prepare for you his mint cucumber soup and give you the little sweet called bird's milk. And after hours of looking with him for his sandals lost near the sea, you visit again together the amusement park where your ancestors are buried, and then go home to the apartment house built by German prisoners of war, to whom your father gave bread, which you remember surprised you. You take the tram to a stop where it is no longer possible to get off. And he walks with you until he vanishes, still holding in his own your invisible hand. When I was a kid, I had a little rock collection. We all had them. They came in a little white box and they had compartments. And in every compartment there was a different rock. The best were iron ore because it made a mess, and rock salt because you could sit and lick the rock salt. So we had these, and I learned a little bit about the rocks. Then I met a man in Ireland who traveled the world with a rucksack, and he didn't want to buy souvenirs. He didn't want a lot of ashtrays with cities' names on them and things like that. So he decided to make a museum, and what he was going to put in his museum, he would choose one stone from every place he was, and he would take it home and put it on a little box with prongs and label it, like pebble beneath Eiffel Tower, July 1977. And it was one he found beneath the Eiffel Tower, and it was beautiful. It was a whole wall of these stones. So I asked him if he minded if I copied it. I thought, I want to do that too. That's what I want to do on my travels. And he said, no problem. Everybody should have a museum. It's fine. He said, just don't take any stones from the Acropolis or the Parthenon because they don't like that. He said, you have to be careful. But he said, when you're walking down the street, say next to the Louvre in Paris, you can just look on the ground and you'll see a little piece of the Louvre. He said, all the buildings are falling apart. So I started to do it, only I wasn't organized and I didn't label them or put them on the wall. So instead what I have is a couple of big grocery bags full of stones from all over the world that are very important, only I can't tell them apart anymore. So I have this jumble of museum, and someday I'm just going to bury them all in my backyard and let, the rock specialists sort out how they all got there when they're found. So this is my museum of stones. And so those of you who like the specific names of things and who know rocks, this poem is for you. Okay. The Museum of Stones. And it's addressed to the man who had the museum on the wall. These are your stones, assembled in matchbox and tin, collected from roadside, culvert and viaduct, battlefield, threshing floor, basilica, abattoir. Stones loosened by tanks in the streets from a city whose earliest map was drawn in ink on linen. Schoolyard stones in the hand of a corpse. Pebble from Baudelaire's We. Stone of the mind within us, carried from one silence to another. Stone of cromlech and cairn, schist and shale, hornblende, agate, marble, millstones, ruins of choirs and shipyards, chalk, marl, mudstone from temples and tombs, stone from the silvery grass near the scaffold, stone from the tunnel lined with bones, lava of a city's entombment, stones chipped from lighthouse, cell wall, scriptorium, paving stones from the hands of those who rose against the army, stones where the bells had fallen, where the bridges were blown, those that had flown through windows, weighted petitions, feldspar, rose quartz, blue schist, Nice and chert, fragments of an abbey at dusk, sandstone toe of a Buddha mortared at Bamyan, stone from the hill of 3 crosses and a crypt, from a chimney where storks cried like human children, stones newly fallen from stars, a stillness of stones, a heart, altar and boundary stone, marker and vessel, first cast, load and hail, bridge stones and others to pave and shut up with, stone apple, stone basil, beech berry, stone break, concretion of the body, as blind, as cold, as deaf, all earth a quarry, all life a labor, stone-faced, stone drunk with hope that this assemblage of rubble taken together would become a shrine or holy place, an ossuary, immovable and sacred, like the stone that marked the path of the sun as it entered the human dawn. Litany in Krakow, the yes of the living, the no of the wall, the yes of the bridge, the no of the water below the bridge, the yes of wind, no of wire, the yes of bells, the no of the bolted door, the yes of air, the no of answer, the yes of swallows, the no of stone. I'm going to read something called Letter to a City Under Siege. I had a friend who was in Sarajevo during the siege of Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina. This occurred in the early to mid-1990s, and the city was surrounded. Snipers were firing on the population, preventing them from getting food, and so on. They even calculated how many kilos the city population had lost collectively. So this is for a poet who was there the whole time, and he escaped on the undercarriage of a truck. He was strapped to the undercarriage, so he was lying a few inches from the road as the truck sped out of the city. Letter to a City Under Siege. Turning the pages of the book you have lent me of your wounded city, reading the braille on its walls, walking beneath ghost chestnuts, past fires that turn the bullet-shattered windows bronze, flaring an instant without warming the fallen houses, where you sleep without water or light, a biscuit tin between you. Or later in the cafe ruins, you discuss all night the burnt literature borrowed from a library where all books met with despair. I wanted to give your notes back to you, to be printed in another language, not yours or mine, but a tongue understood by children who make bulletproof vests out of cardboard. We will then lie down in the cemetery where violets grew in your childhood, before snipers fired on the city using gravestones for cover. Friend, absent one, I can tell you that your tunnel is still there, mud-walled and hollowed of earth, dug for smuggling oranges into the city, oranges bright as winter moons by the barrow load. So let's walk further up the street, to the hill where one is able to see the city woven in fog, roofs filled with sky, uprooted bridges, and a shop window where a shard of glass hangs over the spine of a book. The library burns on page 60 as it burns in all the newspapers of the world. And the clopping of horses' hooves isn't the sound of clopping horses. From here, a dog finds his way through snow with a human bone. And what else? What more? Even the clocks have run out of time. But, my good friend, the tunnel. There is still a tunnel for oranges. Now, I am going to read an old poem. You might know it. It's a documentary poem, and it comes from the years when I was in El Salvador, which was 1978 to March 1980. And I worked at the time, at the end, with the Church Human Rights Office and for Monsignor Oscar Romero, who was assassinated in March 1980 while he was saying Mass in a hospital for cancer patients. A lot of things happened in Salvador in those years, in the time of the death squads, and this is one of those things. It has an obscenity in it. I can't read this on National Public Radio. I did read it once, and it was the last time this obscenity was uttered on National Public Radio. And they made the rule. It's called the Forché rule. You can't say the F word on National Public Radio. But I tried to explain there are several obscenities in the poem besides this word. They said, well, yeah. So this is called the Colonel. What you have heard is true. I was in his house. His wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar. His daughter filed her nails. His son went out for the night. There were daily papers, pet dogs, a pistol on the cushion beside him. The moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. On the television was a cop show. It was in English. Broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's legs or cut his hands to lace. On the windows there were gratings like those in liquor stores. We had dinner, rack of lamb, good wine. A gold bell was on the table for calling the maid. The maid brought green mangoes, salt, a type of bread. I was asked how I enjoyed the country. There was a brief commercial in Spanish. His wife took everything away. There was some talk then of how difficult it had become to govern. The parrot said hello on the terrace. The colonel told it to shut up and pushed himself from the table. My friend said to me with his eyes, say nothing. The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. He spilled many human ears on the table. They were like dried peach halves. There is no other way to say this. He took one of them in his hands, shook it in our faces, dropped it into a water glass. It came alive there. I am tired of fooling around, he said. As for the rights of anyone, tell your people they can go fuck themselves. He swept the ears to the floor with his arm and held the last of his wine in the air. Something for your poetry, no? He said. Some of the ears on the floor caught this scrap of his voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground. May 1978. So for years I never said who the friend in the poem was who said, say nothing with his eyes. But his name was Leonel Gomez Vidas. He was a Salvadoran man who was the nephew of a poet I had been translating, Claribel Alegria. He's the one who invited me to El Salvador, and he was my guide there, my mentor and my friend for more than 30 years. He died on Thanksgiving Eve, 2009, had several heart attacks in one night in an emergency room. So now that he's dead, I feel like I can say his name because he won't be embarrassed by it. Or maybe he is, but, well, I can say it anyway. There was a lot that went on in the years after the war, and I wrote about a little bit of it. But there was a lot I couldn't write about, or rather, when I went to the blank page, just didn't come. It wasn't there. After Lionel died, one particular story, one particular thing that happened came to the page. I was shocked. So I let it go, okay. And Lionel's voice is here too. His voice and my voice. So it's polyphonic, it's both. It's in little sections. And it's a very difficult thing, for me more difficult than the Colonel. For me, ways more obscene than the Colonel. It's called The Ghost of Heaven. Oh, we used to look for bodies, you see, we looked for them everywhere. People would disappear, and there were different places where the bodies would be dumped. There was a place called El Playón, the beach, and a place called Puerto del Diablo, which was the devil's door. But they would also dump them on the streets and often on the beach and so on. So one of our work was to look for them, try to match faces if we could to the very many albums of photographs of disappeared people. The Ghost of Heaven, sleep to sleep through 30 years of night. A child, herself with child, for whom we searched. Through here or there amidst bones still sleeved and trousered. A spine picked clean, a paint can, a skull with hair. Night to night, child, walking toward me through burning maze, over the clean bones of those whose flesh was lifted by zopilotes into heaven. So that is how we ascend, in the clawed feet of fallen angels, to be assembled again in the workrooms of the clouds. She rose from where they found her lying not far from a water urn, leaving herself behind on the ground where they found her, holding her arms before her as if she were asleep. Blue smoke rising from corn cribs, a flap of wings on the walls of the city streets, a plague of initials. Walking through a fire-lit river to a burning house. Dead singer, sewing machine, and piece of dress. Outside a cashew tree wept, blackened cashews over lamina. Outside paper, fireflies rose to the stars. Bring penicillin, if you can, you said. Surgical tape, a whetstone, mosquito repellent, but not the aerosol kind. Especially bring a syringe for sucking phlegm, a knife, wooden sticks, a clamp, and plastic bags. You will also need a bottle of cloud for anesthesia, to sleep like the flight of a crane through colorless dreams. When a leech opens your flesh, it leaves a small volcano. Always pour turpentine over your hair before going to sleep. Such experiences as these are forgotten before memory intrudes. The girl was found. Don't say this. With a man's severed head stuffed into her where a child would have been. No one knew who the man was. Another of the dead. So they had not, after all, killed a pregnant girl. That sound in the brush, a settling of wind in sorghum. If they capture you, talk. Talk, please, yes, you heard me the first time. You will be asked who you are. Eventually, we are all asked who we are. All who come into the world, all who come into the world are sent. Open your curtain of spirit. This is called Morning on the Island. You in California will recognize maybe some aspects of this. It's a small poem. The lights across the water are the waking city. The water shimmers with imaginary fish. Not far from here lie the bones of conifers washed from the sea and piled by wind. Some mornings I walk upon them, bone to bone, as far as the lighthouse. A strange beetle has eaten most of the trees. It may have come here on the ships, playing music in the harbor, or it was always here, a winged jewel, but in the past was kept still by the cold of a winter that no longer comes. There is an owl living in the firs behind us, but he is white, meant to be mistaken for snow, burdening a bough. They say he is the only owl remaining. I hear him at night, listening for the last of the mice, and asking who of no other owl. Harmalapi, it means beautiful sadness in Greece. It begins with a word as small as the cry of Athena's owl, an ache in the cage of breath as when we say can hardly breathe. In sleep, we see our name on a stone, for instance, or while walking in the rain among graves, we feel watched. Others are still coming into our lives. They come, they go out. Some speak quietly beside us on a bench near where koi swim. At night, there is a light sound of wings brushing the walls. Not now is what it sounds like. Or two other words. But they are the same passerines as live in the stone eaves, as forage in the air toward night. To see them, one must not be looking. Sanctuary. Light peeled bell-like through the canopy long ago, or seems so. Then the ghost of a deer and crows flapping through smoke. She made a poultice for me of herbs and mud to suck the poison from the boil, and then she went into a mahogany coffin, as there were then. Mornings horses cantered through ground fog, having broken loose, so I would go out with them, bridles in hand, with no one awake. The closer I came to them, the further they moved away. Following them through the clouds is a journey I would make again. I'm going to close with a poem called What Comes. I suppose it came after I finished cancer treatments, but it was written in that strange place. What comes? To speak is not yet to have spoken, the not yet of a white realm of nothing left, neither for itself nor another, a no longer already there, along with the arrival of what has been, light and the reverse of light, terror as walking blind along the breaking sea, body in whom I lived. The not yet of death darkening what it briefly illuminates, an unknown place as between languages, back and forth, breath to breath, as a calm in the surround rises, fireflies in lindens and ache of pine. You have yourself within you. Yourself. You have her. And there is nothing that cannot be seen. Open then to the coming of what comes. Thank you. Or anything. I don't mind answering. The people who are at my talk today know that I'm shameless. I'm not embarrassed. This is such an intimate setting. They're not taping this, are they? So, what would you like to know? Anything about the poems or anything left over from earlier today? Richard Bausch's students are here and they're not shooting their hands in the air? That's unusual. You mean for people who want to write? Read. No, I believe that if you immerse yourselves in literary art, you will you'll preserve your capacity to sustain contemplation, you will develop an inner life, you will take this with you for the rest of your life, and you can only learn from the other writers in your genre, going all the way back in time. Do not fear the writers of the past. They're still whispering to you. Their books are standing very lonely, book to book in the library. They want to be taken out and opened up, you know? So I think reading is the most important thing. And the second most important thing is probably to stay awake, have a good memory, observe well, remember everything. Keep a notebook. Yes. All of them surprise me, but some of them especially so, yeah. They're all sort of feel like that. I used to wonder, you know, what was writing, because I knew that it was kind of magical, the first draft. But then the real work begins. Those are gifts. The first draft is always a gift. Then you have to work, because often the gift is a mass, you know. It's got something. It's got a spark. You have to keep it. You know it can be there. But that's when you apply everything you know. Everything you know about all the resources of poetry or writing or stories, that's when it's revision where the fun begins. I mean, that's where you can really stay awake and do something consciously to your work. That's where you can achieve a kind of mastery. I've only had 2 poems in my life that weren't revised. Only 2 in my whole life that didn't have to be revised. The rest I could sink in and revise and revise it. Well, you can mess it up revising, of course. This is not just great. If sometimes you destroy, but you can always go back to your first version and start again. But I just want to say that revision is the actual pleasurable work of the writing, because doing the first draft when it comes from somewhere else and it's a gift and it's strange, that can actually be kind of frightening, you know. Wonderful, but frightening. And so the work of it comes with the revision. So how I do it, I put it away for a while and I look at it. Really hard, I look at it, and then I just start fooling around, you know. Test every word, see if there's another word that's better, move them around, you know, take out something that doesn't need to be there, and look at what you imply by something, you know. Some little detail implies the whole scene, and you don't need all the other details, you know. There's a lot. Economy, compression, seeing what you can achieve with the least. The least language, the most explosion of meaning. I don't know what I just said. Maybe makes sense. Okay, anyway. Yes, in the back, I see your hand. Well, every book is completely different in my case from every other book. At least I think so. Some people don't think so. But I think they're all very different. So I went through phases in different ways in my life. And I read very eclectically. You know, I read from the past, I read experimental work, I do all kinds of reading of different things. So I'm influenced by different people at different times, and also by the other arts. So this changes quite a lot. I think I've also been influenced a lot by poets from other languages in translation in some cases. So, and I would say chiefly among these are Latin American, Eastern European and Central European, Greek, Italian. And so, you know, I've had those influences for a long time. And now I'm really reading a lot of African American poets who are contemporaries. They're doing very exciting, interesting things, and I'm stimulated by that. So I go through, you know, zones, you know, phases. So sometimes it's a country, sometimes it's a period, so yeah. Yes, yeah, it's okay. You can't decide this, okay? There's a moment when you feel like you have taken it as far as you could. You just get a feeling, okay, this is it. For better or worse, this is it. You don't always stay in love with it, or sometimes you fall out of love very quickly. But you can tell there's something there, then you keep it, you know? If you wait too long, like with this, I just keep taking poems out. That means I have to write new ones, you know. This is an evolving work in progress. But works in progress are wonderful, you know, and revision is really a wonderful experience. I actually teach mostly how to revise something. I teach people how to play with their work and how to interrogate it and question it and mess it up and rearrange it. And they have to do everything, even cut every line physically apart from every other line and scatter them around on a table and take a look at what they've done. You know, it's a little nuts, but I have lots of funny little tricks that I play with poems, and I teach them to other people. And it just opens up possibilities, you know. This work is very lyric narrative. It's very, you know, usually a particular construction of a speaker and so on. But a lot of my work isn't that way. So I change a lot. And I have a feeling the next one's not going to be at all lyric narrative. But I got influenced by writing prose, because I'm finishing a memoir right now, sentences. So I'm not saying that, and sentences are hard. You know what's really hard? To keep a book in your head all at once. It's like a symphony where you have to keep track of every note that everything is playing all at the same time, or 12-dimensional chess. You know, it's really hard. I have new respect for fiction writers and prose writers, because I had no idea what they were holding in their minds the whole time they were working. That's what I'm trying to do now. But I think writing sentences are jewels. They're just wonderful to write. There's so many possibilities for a sentence. So a sentence is my new poem, but maybe that's a good idea. Write a book of sentences, one-sentence poems. Anyway, I think that, what was I saying? Well, I think that's what influenced this book, was that I was writing prose the whole while also. The book of prose I've been working on for 11 years. I'm almost finished, and you know what? I recently got scared. What am I going to do when it's finished? I have lived with this book for 11 years, you know. I know what I'm going to do. Dick is going to say I'm going to start a new one, right? That's what he's going to say. But it's kind of like, really, it's sad, you know. I'm almost done now. You know, what am I going to worry about and wring my hands over? And, you know, it's just been a beautiful experience. But 11 years, you know, is a long time to work on a book. It's almost done. So that's what I'm doing, and I hope to finish both of these at the same time. And now they've both been, this poetry, 13 years, the prose book, 11 years, and when they're published, people say, whoa, man, she just did 2 books at the same time, you know. Yes, it takes years and years and years to become an overnight success, as they say. So, okay. Thank you for having me. I really am happy to be here. I'll see some of you tomorrow.